Hey YouTube, I didn't mean to cut off the video. I thought it was still recording and it went into another video and I don't know how to attach it. So I'm just going to start where I left off. Japan refused, and on December the 7th, 1941, it carried out a devastating attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The United States declared war on Japan. Germany and Italy, by then allies of Japan, declared war on the United States. American industry and agriculture were harnessed for the war effort. Production of military equipment was staggering. 300,000 aircraft, 5,000 cargo ships, and 60,000 landing craft, and 86,000 tanks in less than 4 hours. Much of the work was done by women who went to work in factories while men went to fight. The United States, Britain, and Soviet Union, allied to counter the Nazi threat, decided that primary military effort was to be concentrated in Europe. They were determined to break the German-Italian grip on the Mediterranean and prevent the fall of Moscow. Then they would liberate Rome and Paris, and finally Berlin. From Germany's occupation of Poland in 1939 to its surrender in 1945, the war in Europe claimed the lives of millions of peoples, soldiers and civilians alike. Millions more were exterminated in the Holocaust. And I'm using my fingers, Holocaust. Nazi Germany's systematic policy of genocide against the Jews, and I'm using my fingers again, the Jews and other groups. I'm using my quote fingers, okay? The war in Asia was largely a series of naval battles and amphibious assaults to break the Japanese grip on islands in the Pacific Ocean. Fighting there continued after the fighting in Europe had stopped. The final battles were among the war's bloodiest. Most Americans, including President Harry Truman, believed that an invasion of Japan would be even worse. Truman was willing to use the newly developed atomic bomb to bring the war to an end. When Japan refused to surrender, he ordered bombs dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The plan worked. Japan surrendered, and World War II was finally over in August 1945. Only later would people realize the full implications of awesome destructive power of nuclear weapons. Now, this is what Michael Rivero is always talking about. You know, they told us we went to war for one reason, and then we went for another. And I used to watch him as well. Some of his comments I just don't like, but I am able to still go and watch his show and take from it what I can. As Rob would say, the babies. Yeah, the babies. Anyway, the Cold War, Korean conflict, and Vietnam. The United States played a major role in global affairs in the years immediately after World War II, especially through its influence in the newly formed United Nations and North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The most important political and diplomatic issue of the early post-war period was the Cold War. It grew out of long-standing disagreements between the United States and the Soviet Union over which type of government and economic system produced the most liberty, equality, and prosperity. Faced with a post-war world of civil wars and disintegrating empires, the United States hoped to provide the stability to make peaceful reconstruction possible. It advocated democracy and open trade and committed 17 million. Hold on, let me ask my husband. Okay, he said it looks like a typo. Maybe it's supposed to be a period, but 17,000 million. Y'all see it under the Marshall and let's see, Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe. So I'm going to show you the pictures now. This is President Harry S. Truman. He's holding a newspaper that wrongly announced his defeat by Republican candidate Thomas Dewey in 1948 election. So I guess he was, hyped and probably just laughing his way all the way to the bank. And this is the U.S. infantry fire against North Korean forces invading South Korea in 1951 in a conflict that lasted 3 painful years. And what's amazing to me always is you go into these war countries and the reporters are like there on the scene. And I know you have a job to do, but I mean, it just makes me think that these people are relentless in the war and the recording, the programming. But anyway, the Soviet Union wanted to secure its borders at all costs. It used military force to help bring communist regimes to power in Central and Eastern Europe. The United States vowed to contain Soviet expansionism. It demanded and obtained a full Soviet withdrawal from Iran. It supported Turkey against Soviet attempts to control shipping lanes. It provided economic and military aid to Greece to fight a strong communist insurgency, and it led the effort to airlift millions of tons of supplies to Berlin when the Soviet Union blockaded that divided city. Now, with most American aid moving across the Atlantic, little could be done to prevent the communist forces of Mao Zedong from taking control of China in 1949. Now, when North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea the next year, the United States secured UN support for military intervention. It's funny that in all these, the UN is always the people that they seek, and then they never bring about peace. It's like, are they the enforcers? Probably so. Anyway, I'm going to move forward in the reading so we can get this book done, or this paper done. Now, the North Koreans were eventually pushed back and a truce was signed, but tensions would remain high and U.S. troops would stay for decades. In the mid-1960s, the United States sent troops to defend South Vietnam against a communist insurgency based in North Vietnam. American involvement escalated greatly, but was not enough to prevent the South from collapsing in 1975. The war cost hundreds of thousands of lives. It also caused bitter divisions at home, making Americans wary of further foreign entanglements. They weren't too wary, because we've been in war for how long? Let us find truth. Okay. Cultural change, 1950 through 1980, the year I was born. Okay, so most Americans felt confident with their role in the world in the 1950s. They accepted the need for a strong stance against global communism and supported efforts to share the benefits of democracy as widely as possible. Right. At home, they were experiencing phenomenal economic gains and a shift to a service economy. A boom in births fueled the growth of suburban areas around cities, yet not all Americans participated in this good life, and gradually challenges to the status quo became to mount. African Americans launched a movement to guarantee fair treatment everywhere. They won a major victory in 1954 when the Supreme Court ruled that separate educational facilities for black children were not equal to those for white children. Let me read the next sentence before I jump to a conclusion. The decision started the process of desegregating the nation's public schools in the 1960s, led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and with the support of President Lyndon Johnson. African Americans won passage of civil rights and voting rights legislation. And I am going to put my opinion in here. Number one, we should have been fighting for human rights, right? My husband's in the background. We should have been fighting for human rights. And number two, we should have stayed separate. Because to me, joining together just set us back another 1,000 years. Now history is repeating itself. You got two brothers found hung in trees. Both were from Atlanta. One of them happened in Atlanta. That breaks my heart. And it's just like, I'm confused at why we focused in on the I Have a Dream speech and we never heard that the Negro has become a stranger in its own land. So it just, I mean, it makes me think about so much. And this is the stuff that we're taught in public schools. But I'm going to go back to the reading so we can get it done. Okay. So, we won passage of civil rights and voting rights legislation, right? Some black leaders, such as Malcolm X, argued against interracial cooperation, and some militant calls for reform led to violence. However, many African Americans made quiet, steady progress in the ranks of the middle class, leading to a profound demographic change in American society. During the 1960s and 70s, many American women expressed frustration that they did not have the same opportunities as men. And this is at the point of time when we joined up with the Caucasian woman. We joined up with the white woman struggle. Like, this wasn't a struggle of ours. Support of your man is way more important than getting the same opportunities as he does. I get what they were fighting for, but it just wasn't our fight. It wasn't important. We were trying to recover from trauma. They were still turning hoses on us. They were burning crosses, hanging. I mean, we were traumatized. And how did we end up joining up with this fight? I watched another YouTube video, and I think it was a lady, the doctor. I don't know. I feel bad because I don't remember names well. But anyway, what she was saying was, just like I just said, like, we needed counseling at that point, at the least, as a community. But I'm going to move forward because, like I said, we got to finish. Okay. Led by writer, and this was led by writer Betty Friedan and a journalist, Gloria Steinem. Pay attention to the names. They organized a movement that helped change laws and traditions to give women the chance to compete equally with men in business and education. However, their efforts to adopt a constitutional amendment guaranteeing equal rights for women fell short when only 35 of the necessary 38 states ratified it. A new generation of Native American leaders organized to defend the rights the government had promised in various treaties with tribal groups. Okay, so all this was going on at the same time. So this is a new generation of Native American leaders. They had organized the rights the government had promised in various treaties with tribal groups. So at this point, they had already come in and just started taking over. And then this is a group that had to remind them, hey, you had an agreement. We made a deal. You don't just get to stay here and just wild out. So they were still trying to control what was already out of hand. But they used the court system to regain control of tribal lands and water rights. They used the legislative process to get the assistance they needed to house and educate their people. The first Native American to be elected to the Senate was Ben Nighthorse Campbell in 1992. Hispanic Americans, especially those whose families came from Mexico, Central America, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, became more politically active too. They were elected to local, state, and national offices, and they organized to fight discrimination. Cesar Chavez, for example, led a nationwide consumer boycott of California grapes that forced growers to negotiate with his United Farm Workers Union for higher wages and improved working conditions. And these were the lands that were taken by from the indigenous, and they started making money and didn't even want to pay fair wages at this point. So many students became politically active to protest the war in Vietnam, which they believed was immoral, and they were right. They organized large protests that eventually put pressure on President. Give me one moment. Gotta scroll. President Johnson to begin peace negotiations. I'm going to pause so I can let you see the pictures. This is Jackie Robinson sliding home in a 1948 baseball game. Robinson broke the color barrier against black professional baseball players when he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers and became one of the stars of the game. So this is Jackie Robinson in 1948. Y'all see that, right? Okay, next picture. And this stuff is interesting to me because I couldn't get it in high school or whenever they taught us this. So it's like me relearning again. This is America's first star of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. And I'm using my quote fingers. First star. You know, they tend to steal stuff. Performing on television's Ed Sullivan Show, September the 9th, 1956. And remember, these are the same people that came in and patented 36,000, and then the next year it was 440,000 patents. So they came here and stole probably everything. But anyway, this is Martin Luther King Jr. He's escorting children to a previously all-white public school in Grenada, Mississippi. And I was listening to Shin Poo Nada Tata. Y'all know who I'm talking. Shin. And if I'm saying your name wrong, sister, I apologize. No disrespect. But I was looking at her doing her video on Martin Luther King being a part of the Boule. I don't know how true it is, but we should have been fighting for human rights. And I'm not taking away from the fight. It's just now, you know, I think about a lot of stuff differently. Anyway, so they were wanted Johnson to begin peace negotiations. So young people also began to reject their parents' cultural values. So they were just causing disruptions. The most visible signs of these so-called counterculture were long hair, rock and roll music, and the use of illegal drugs. Americans concerned about the environment organized efforts to reduce air pollution and water pollution. The year 1970 saw the first Earth Day celebration and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. These are the same people that allow them to spray chemtrails down on us now. Okay, so environmental legislation reflected the need to reduce pollutants without imposing burdensome costs on industries. So the environmental legislation reflected the need to reduce pollutants without imposing burdensome costs on industries. So, you know, if they had the right amount of money, if the amount of money outweighed, you know, the lives of the people, then they might bend on it, right? Okay, so the great social changes of the 1950s through the 1980s grew out of an open, fluid, and diverse society. Demands for change were sometimes peaceful and sometimes deadly. Compromises were necessary, surely, if sometimes slowly the United States changed to better reflect its multicultural foundation. Their image. They worry about images here. Y'all know that. Okay, so this is President Lyndon B. Johnson. He engineered the most ambitious domestic legislative agenda through Congress since Roosevelt's New Deal. And I have to read up on that. I bet he did, though. And this is the crest of the counterculture wave in the United States, the 3-day 1969 outdoor rock concert and gathering known as Woodstock. And I just noticed that all these are Caucasians, mostly. I'll say mostly. I don't know how many of us were there. But when we used to try to have Juneteenth in Atlanta, you know, if the right people complained, they would try to shut it down. But they were doing the same thing here outside smoking weed. When they say different drugs, of course, they were on that acid. What were the other drugs? the hallucinogens. That's what they were doing. But if you're out there just smoking kush, the right person complain, they'll shut the whole thing down. So that's what I noticed about that picture. Anyway, this is the end of the 20th century. The United States has always experienced periods of political polarization as Americans debated ways to deal with the international events, demographic change, and the effects of technological innovation. The last decades of the 20th century were no exception. The liberal activism of the 1960s through the 70s were eclipsed by a new conservatism in the 1980s. Conservatives advocated limited government, a strong national defense, a firm stance against communism, tax cuts to spur economic growth, tough anti-crime measures, more religious expression in public life, and a stricter code for social behavior. Former actor and Republican governor of California, Ronald Reagan, the war on drugs, right, who represented a stability to many Americans, won 2 terms as president. And the villains always are painted as the heroes, right? Okay, his supporters credit his policies with hastening the collapse of the Soviet Union. Americans moved to a more centrist position in 1992 and elected as president Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, right, who had organized his campaign around the themes of youth and change. Now, this is the same person that created the prison industrial complex, and him and Hillary have made millions off of imprisoning our black men. So pay attention. Now, some of Clinton's proposals were quite liberal. Did I skip? Yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yeah, they were quite liberal, such as his plan for a government-managed healthcare system. So he got the ball rolling on this health plan that we all now blame President Barack Obama for. Because I know I blamed them, but now this is new information. Now, this is something which Congress never voted on. Another proposal ending government payoffs to welfare recipients and helping them get jobs. It was co-opted for conservatives and eventually proved quite successful. Normal, and I'm going to try to speed it up. I'm almost done, but my phone is dying. Normal differences in politics turned especially bitter after the presidential election of 2000. The popular vote and the electoral college vote were nearly evenly divided between Democrat Al Gore and Republican George W. Bush. Thousands of ballots cast in the state of Florida were contested. After a series of court challenges over laws and procedures governing recounts, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a narrow decision that effectively gave the election to Bush. Bush expected to focus on domestic issues such as education, the economy, and Social Security. Yeah, stealing my Social Security. So this is him. Okay. But his presidency changed irrevocably. Y'all, I'm sorry, I can't get it. But y'all see the word. On September the 11th, 2001, on that day, foreign terrorists hijacked 4 passenger airplanes and crashed them into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. And the Defense Department's Pentagon headquarters near Washington, D.C. and a rural area of Pennsylvania, Bush declared war on global terrorism. So this is, who did this, his little part. And they were aiming to make you a terrorist, because now Black Lives Matter, they're calling the shootings and stuff terrorist crimes. So that was the goal. Like, who are we going to paint the picture of the terrorists? It's ISIS overseas, and then we're going to work our way into the States. And now, if you have on a dashiki, you looking to look kind of like a terrorist to others. That's how they influenced, the pictures and stuff on the news. But anyway, okay, so once that happened, Americans were generally united in the early phases, but many grew increasingly uncomfortable as the operation expanded. The long-term effects of events and trends occurring at the beginning of the 21st century have yet to be fully understood. And of course, this is a picture from 9/11, and that's another picture. The left picture was firefighters beneath the destroyed vertical struts of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers after September 11, 2001, and Washington, D.C. Above projected image of how the New York City skyline might look with the addition of Freedom Tower, which will be built at the World Trade Center site. So they already had an idea of what they were going to put there right after the ashes cleared. And again, pay attention. This is who we're dealing with. And I'm no conspiracy theorist, but when somebody can show me some facts in black and white, the reports that they released, all the blacking out of the reports, this is who we're dealing with. Okay, we're almost done. Maybe we'll make it. Now this is the afterword. From its origins as a group of obscure colonies hugging the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States has undergone a remarkable transformation. One political analyst has called it the first universal nation. Its population of 300 million people represents almost every nationality and ethnic group on earth. It is a nation where the pace and extent of change, economic, technological, cultural, demographic, and social, is unceasing, right? You keep going to other countries now. Events in the United States are often the first sign of the modernization and change that inevitably bring other nations and society into an increasing interdependent, interconnected world. One world governing. That's where we're headed here. Pay attention. This is a newer book. Yet the United States also maintains a sense of continuity. It poses core values that can be traced to its founding as a nation in the late 1700s. That was after they invaded and conquered you. They always give us our history, around about that time. These include a faith in individual freedom. I'm using my quote fingers again. And democratic government, quote fingers, and a commitment to economic opportunity and progress for all, quote fingers, and I'm winking my right eye. Now, they are the legacy of a rich and turbulent history. And when they say turbulent, they mean that. And the continuing task of the United States is to ensure that its values of freedom, democracy, and opportunity are protected and will flourish through the 21st century. And I'm using my quote fingers. All right, so this is a picture. I guess that's the New World Trade. I don't know. Let me see. No information there. Okay, y'all. Thank y'all for listening. I'm giving y'all the last little art that was here. This is a combination. Portrait, maybe. Yeah. And then how did MTV get in this? Anyway, these are the last pictures. And what we're going to do is cut this off. We've done. Thank you for listening. And peace out, family.